Welcome back to my channel for a very quick tutorial about the new Leica Q3 43mm aposomicron lens, the best of the best in the Leica universe you can have. And I think after I posted my introductory video, which I will post down below in the info box, and also a shorter video about the filter problem of this camera, which in my opinion is not a really tough one, because you can shoot this camera easily without filters. As you can see here, I have no filter applied, it's protected by the lens hood. I think it's time now to provide a quick tutorial, and don't miss my long tutorials on the Q3 28mm, which is the sibling of this one here, and which comes in 3 parts and covers everything you need to know about the new Leica Q3, including this one, because the functions are exactly the same. There are only a couple of differences, in particular the new lens here, which is an aposomicron 43mm instead of a Summilux with 28mm. Let's kick this off. Alright, let's start with some housekeeping. First of all, I'm filming this video outside. Don't ask me why. There is a reason why I'm filming outside, and there is some background noise here, which I hope you will forgive me, because that's the way it is in this video. Second, I'm really grateful for the increase of subscribers on my channel. You guys did a great job. You're supporting me. I really appreciate that. And I'm so happy about the increase I saw in the last weeks when I started to encourage you more proactively in my videos to subscribe to my channel, because it helps increasing its reach and it helps my channel to grow. So many thanks for that. And if you are not a subscriber yet and you like my content, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and stay tuned on my content. Last but not least, I will not cover every tiny little detail and setting you can engage with here in the menu system. Of course, I will focus on the essential ones. My aim actually is to get this video not longer than about 30 minutes, give or take, in order to provide a quick introduction. And as I said, there is a long tutorial out there in 3 parts where you can look up all the functions, every tiny little setting here in the menu system, what have you. So let's start with the camera body and the elements here. First of all, we have an LCD screen here, and that LCD screen can be tilted. And that's very convenient for various reasons, because you can shoot in different angles here and always keep oversight via the LCD screen what's going on. Second, we have here a shutter speed dial, and if that is on setting A, then the shutter speed is selected by the camera automatically. Otherwise, you have here manual sections, and I will come to these settings later, because there is one which is really essential, which I want to quickly cover. That's the 1+ here. And then we have here an aperture ring. The aperture ring has the usual beautiful clicks, what we are used to from aposomicron lenses in the Leica M lens lineup. Let's listen to this. I hope you can hear it. And widest open is an f2.0, which is the standard for aposomicron lenses. We also have a focus ring here, but the focus ring in the standard setting is locked, which means you are on autofocus. If you want to unlock it, there is a little button here. If you push that and rotate it, then, and it will not accidentally go back into that locked mode here, then you can manually focus the lens. And you have a scale here, and the scale has, of course, distances. And I think in general, you have here the usual setup, which people are used to if they are rangefinder photographers in the Leica universe. We also have a macro ring here, and you can rotate this into macro, and then the scale here changes, and the camera is ready for close-up shots and macro type situations. Simple like that. So that's first of all what I wanted to say. Whenever you are not in that locked position here, the camera actually is in manual focus mode and not in autofocus mode. If you want to leverage the fantastic autofocus system in this camera, which features contrast detection as well as phase detection, then you need to bring it back into the locked position. So you push that little button here, rotate it, and then it snaps in, and now it's locked. See, now you're in autofocus mode. And then we have here the shutter release button and the on-off switch. We have here a control wheel. And the control wheel also has a center button here, which is customizable. We have 2 customizable buttons here. We have a 4-directional control button here, and the center button is also customizable. We have a menu button, that one is not customizable, and a play button, which is also not customizable. And that's basically it, what you find here on this camera. Of course, we have on the side here some ports. We have a micro HDMI port, which is here, and we have a USB-C port, which is here. You can use this for charging the camera. You can use this to wire it up for tethered shooting. You can use it to connect it with the Leica Photos app on your iPhone, and so on and so on. I've also mounted here a hand grip, which is still the one from the Q3 28. I'm waiting for the more gray color one, which will come hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And then you have this removable lens hood here, of course, which I showed in my video when I spoke about the filter problem. And I think that's it, besides maybe the hot shoe, which you can use for flash and studio photography. That's all it is. Now, maybe in terms of operations, usually you have on cameras 4 different modes. You have program mode, you have shutter speed priority, you have aperture priority, and you have fully manual mode. And if you want to go into program mode here, you need to switch that aperturing into the A setting for automatic. So let's do this. Now it's in automatic setting for the aperture, which means the camera will decide what aperture is best for you. That's a setting I never use. We also have here on the shutter speed dial A, so that means also the shutter speed is selected by the camera, and that means you are now in program mode. And that is very convenient for beginners, definitely not for pro shooters, but is a first entry ticket into the Leica world if you have no experience with manual photography. If you want to go into aperture priority, you go here to the manual setting of the aperture. So this is, for instance, widest open an f2, this would be an f8, for instance, for landscape photography, and you select the aperture, but the shutter speed coming to the correct exposure is selected and figured out by the camera since you're here in the A setting. If you want to switch now to shutter speed priority, you actually go back here into the A mode, and then you operate the shutter speed dial by hand. So for instance, here I would be at 1/250 seconds. And now you select the shutter speed, and the aperture for the correct exposure is selected by the camera, which is shutter speed priority. If you want to go into fully manual mode, you can select your shutter speed here on the shutter speed dial, and you can select the aperture here, and then you are in fully manual mode. There is of course a hidden setting here which comes up if you go to 1+. I'm going to show this in a moment when I switch the camera on. Let's now switch the camera on, and let's go into the menu settings. This is done via the on-off switch here, and you automatically come to live screen here. And in the live screen you have essential information. You can customize this. This is a more advanced feature, and you can also toggle between different presentations here of the information and the way it is displayed here on the LCD screen. Of course, you have an electronic viewfinder here. That's a really good one, and some of the settings concern only if you shoot via electronic viewfinder, and some of the settings concern if you shoot via the LCD display. And if you press the menu button once, you come into what I call a control or status screen, and that one is not customizable yet in the same way as people have seen it in my Leica SL3 videos. This is still the former graphical user interface. Not a bad one, and it has one advantage I'm going to point out in a moment, but it has not the new icons, or as some people call them, the licons, and it also has no customization here in the representation. So for instance, if I tap and hold here, it will not give me the option to replace that setting here by some other setting. And there's always an escape from the status screen. The first option is you push the menu button, then you get into the menus here, line item by line item, or you also have a little symbol here, which again you cannot remove or customize, which is in the lower right hand side corner here, the 3 lines here, and if you push that, you get also to the first page of the menu system. Compared to other camera brands, like for instance Sony or Nikon, the menu structure of Leica cameras is typically quite overseeable. It's not as complex, but it has grown over the years based on an enrichment of features. And if I press the menu button repeatedly, you see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 menu pages with line items in menu entries, and they also have submenus. And that means you need some familiarity with the menu structure and the system if you want to fully leverage the potential of this camera. And again, and for the last time, I'm referring here to my detailed tutorials on the Leica Q3 28mm. Now, you always have here in this graphical user interface, which is the former one and has changed for the Leica SL3, the option to create a favorites menu for yourself. And that will appear between, let's say, the status screen and the first menu page if you press that button, and is typically also indicated by a symbol. So let's see how we can do this. And let's scroll here until we come to customize controls. And if we go to customize controls, you see here edit favorites, and now in edit favorites I can actually go and select certain things, certain menu items I want to have in my own favorites menu. And let's say drive mode is essential for me, let's say self timer is essential for me, and maybe one more, let's say autofocus tracking start position is essential for me. So let's select them. Let's now go out into live view. Let's press the menu button again. Let's press it once, and now you see between the status screen and page number 1 of the menus, we have now a little icon, and that indicates my favorites. And the 3 menu entries I selected for that, they are basically here. It's the drive mode, it's the self timer, and autofocus tracking start position. By the way, let me tell you, the favorites menu is something very convenient. I used to use this very intensely on the Leica SL2 and also on the Q cameras. Unfortunately, in the new menu, the new graphical user interface of the Leica SL3, it's gone. I haven't found any option to bring back the favorites menu and let it resurrect from death. And maybe that's something Leica could improve in a further firmware version of the Leica SL3. And what I also wanted to say is that I personally believe if that is done and the favorites menu is back on the Leica SL3, they should actually also give the same graphical user interface to the Leica Q cameras, what they now use in the Leica SL3 camera, because then it's convenient in terms of workflow. Everything is the same. You can travel with a compact camera, a Q camera, and an SL3, a system camera, and have the best of all worlds with you wherever you go. I want to now quickly walk through the most essential settings. These are the ones I touch and set up immediately when I switch the camera on for the very first time. And in drive mode here we have single and we have continuous. Single means, you focus by half pressing the shutter button. If focus has been found, your focus field will turn green, for instance, and then you can take the shot and the focus will sit as intended. You also have continuous here, and that means autofocus is updating continuously. And there are also different burst rates here. So 2 frames per second, if you keep holding down the shutter release button, it will continue to fire. 7 frames, 9 frames, 15 frames. But be careful here, because there is a little slash and AF in the first 2 settings, and that means that the autofocus still works and will still update. If you move from 4 frames per second, 14-bit to 7 frames per second, it will no longer update automatically and continuously the autofocus. And that is something you need to bear in mind. So 4 frames per second, 14-bit is end of story if you want to have the autofocus updating continuously while you keep the shutter release button pressed down. And then we have down here 2 more settings. So that's interval shooting. I just used this feature with my Leica SL3 in Morocco for star trails. Very nice result. Maybe I'm going to post this on my channel. And then we have exposure bracketing, which means you can later in Lightroom, for instance, compose various frames with different exposure and stack them together in a way creating an HDR image or an image where you have more light in the shadows and where the brightness in maybe overexposed areas of the image is a little better controlled. Simple like that. So that's drive mode. Self timer we don't use here, but you have the choice between 2 seconds and 12 seconds. And we have focusing here with a sub menu with quite some important settings. I will come back later with a few tips and tricks here what you can set up here. For the time being, this is good for an initial setting. Exposure metering I very often have on spot or center weighted. If you shoot in daylight, you might also want to go for multi-field, and if you have a lot of highlights and differences in terms of light intensity in the image, highlight weighted is the correct setting for you. For the time being, let's put this on multi-field. Then we have here exposure compensation. That's another important feature in photography, actually a very basic one, and you can steer this here. So this is 1 full stop down, this is 1 full stop up, but don't be surprised if this does not work in manual mode if you are a beginner, because in manual mode, of course, you control everything with ISO, shutter speed and aperture according to the light triangle, and then exposure compensation has no meaning and no function here. Let's go back. We have ISO, auto ISO, and then ISO from 50. If you want to jump quickly to the end of the list, just push the up direction button here to 100,000. So that's an insanely large range of ISO values you can choose here. I have this on daylight, typically on auto ISO. If I go for night photography and night shooting, I have it on ISO 100, which is the native ISO of the sensor in the Leica Q cameras. And then on the next page we have auto ISO settings. Now here it's safe actually to go to 12,500 maximum ISO. You can also go lower if you're scared about noise, but noise is no longer a problem on these sensors, and in particular with the new features based on AI in Lightroom, you can always hex noise away. You have different settings here for the shutter speed limit. You can keep it on auto and then the camera will decide what the best shutter speed limit is for you. But you can also manually set it if you want to be sure and safe, for instance, if you have moving subjects in the scene. And then we have certain settings for flash photography, not so essential for an initial setup. White balance, you have all kinds of options here, including, by the way, down here, gray card. But also for an initial setting, it's good to have this on auto. You have photo file format, that's essential. I always go for RAW format, which is DNG and JPEG, but you can also go for DNG only if you want to save storage on your SD card in the camera. And then on DNG resolution, it's convenient to go for the largest one, but the best dynamic range, as I pointed out in a separate video, you actually achieve if you go to the medium resolution of 36 megapixel. But you know, you can keep this at 60 megapixel for an initial setup of the camera. JPEG settings, not so important at this point in time, but of course here you have the Leica LUTs, which you can load into the camera via the Leica Photos app. We have here scene mode, and you should keep this at program mode, aperture priority, shutter speed priority, and manual mode, and do not go for all these others. That might, you know, create a certain look, but at the very end, if you are a semi-professional or a professional, you will do your post-processing anyway in the DNG file and not on the JPEG. Optical image stabilization, I keep this at auto. You could also switch it on at all times. There is optical image stabilization in the camera lens, important to note, not in the camera body. This is not an in-body image stabilization like you have it in the Leica SL3, for instance. And the typical gain in terms of full stops you get if it is activated and you shoot handheld is, in my experience, 3 stops. Someone might be able to get to 4 stops, but my hands are not super calm. As you see here, when I'm freely holding the camera, it's a little bit shaky. And if you have it on auto, the camera will decide by itself. For instance, if it's resting on a calm location like a tripod, it might switch the image stabilization off. And I typically switch it off if I have it on a tripod, because then you don't need it. But auto, I think, is a good setting here. Photo aspect ratio, keep it at what the sensor aspect ratio is, namely 3:2. Perspective control is an advanced feature, which I described various times in videos on my channel, and is something you can also set up for a customizable function button here. I'm going to show this later quickly. Then shutter type, I keep this on hybrid. That means I get even faster shutter speeds if the camera switches automatically to electronic shutter. And I can also manually select here if I want to stick to mechanical shutter only, but then you cannot become as fast as if you would allow for electronic shutter, or you would switch the camera to hybrid, where you can just operate the shutter speed by touch in the menu in a way that it gets faster than 1/2000 seconds. Flash settings, not important for an initial setup. Exposure preview, keep it in all modes. That's the safest way to always see what's going on in the scene in front of you. Auto review, you can switch this off if you don't want an image to be previewed after you shot it. Long exposure noise reduction, keep it on. I actually switched it off on my Leica SL3 for the star trails, because the interval then between the shots becomes too long. Customized control we quickly covered. I come back to this later. I showed it when we talked about editing the favorites menu. Digital zoom, that's a very good one. I showed this in my initial video about the Leica Q3 43mm, and I will quickly show it later when we set up buttons which are customizable. User profiles is a pro feature, not so important at this point in time. Capture assistance, here you can go for grid, on, off, what have you. I actually have this typically off. Clipping, I don't need. Level gauge, I need hardly. And histogram I use sometimes. If you switch it on, go back into live view, you have a little histogram here on your live screen, and I mentioned before that what appears on the live screen is customizable, and you can also toggle through different appearances of the live view here. Let's go back here and let's switch this off again. So we go here and switch this off for the time being, is a distraction for this tutorial. Let's go back. Then we have play mode setup, not important for an initial setup. Display settings, not important. Leica Photos app, not important for an initial setup. Format card, of course, you can do this here. I'm not doing it now. Camera settings, I actually changed this from L to Q, because that indicates me in the first letter, and the first letter is the only one you can customize here, that the image has been taken with a Q camera. You can reset the image numbering. Power saving is something I typically switch off. The battery here with more capacity, so the 2200 milliampere hours is actually quite capable, and I don't need auto power off and all the time get an annoying disappearance of my screen or the camera going to sleep. Acoustic signals I have on for everything, but on low volume. Then we have USB charging. This is on, of course. I use this port here very often to charge the camera quickly. I hardly swap batteries at this point in time. USB mode is set up for connection with the iPhone. On Apple MFI, WLAN is for the time being off. and date and time has been set at the very beginning when I switched on the camera for the first time. Camera information is an interesting one because here I set up the copyright information, and you see it's my YouTube name which I have in here. All the other things you can ignore for the time being. Of course, you should check the firmware number from time to time and check on the Leica website if there is a new one available. And then we have language, which is English in my case, and I can reset the camera to its initial hardware settings. That's basically all on the settings. That's the most essential things besides customization of the buttons, which is something I want to show in a moment. A moment ago, we spoke about perspective control, and perspective control is here. And if I switch this on, I get auxiliary lines in the live view, and they update according to the information the sensors in the camera gather. And this information is then written into the metadata, and Lightroom, based on their cooperation with Leica and Adobe, can use this information, read it out of the metadata, and automatically correct the perspective, for instance, of falling lines. Now, I don't want to have this on all the time. I want to have this on only, for instance, if I'm shooting architecture. So let's switch it off, but let's give it an easy access. And that can be done by the customizable function buttons. So let's assign this function to this custom button here. And for this, I press and hold it, and then I get all kinds of different options here, what I can assign to that button. And somewhere here we find perspective control. You will see it is somewhere at the bottom. Here it is. So if I select this, now I have perspective control on this function button. Let's press it once, and now I can switch perspective control on. Let's press it another time, and then I can switch it off instantly like that. And that's very convenient because then I don't have to scroll around in the menu system. I just have it assigned to a function button, and that's where it should be. Then we have another function button here. Currently, if I press this, it goes into the digital zoom, and you see this is now switching from 43mm natively to 60mm focal length simulation, then to 75, to 90, to 120, and you always have that information what simulated focal length you are in the lower right hand side corner. It shows 120 at this point in time, and the last one is 150. And then I can take a shot, of course, and that shot also, if I go into the play mode, is immediately reproduced in the focal length simulation I've chosen before on that frame. Let's switch this back, and I think it's convenient to have it here. I use this feature very often on the Q3 28 as well as on the Q3 43, and it works like a charm. But if I wanted to change that, I can do the same as what I did on the right hand side custom button here. I press and hold, and now I can go from digital zoom to something else, whatever I want to have here. Now I keep it the way it is because I like that feature. We have one more customizable function button here in the center of the control wheel, and if I press it, it goes into the ISO setting, currently on auto. Then I have here 50, 100, and so on, and I want to have the setting in that way. I think it's convenient to have easy access to ISO, but I could also do this via the control screen here. I just press the menu button once, and then I have my ISO setting, and the ISO setting is basically here. And you see it's currently in automatic, but I can also use the control wheel here now to set this to a different value, and I can also do it via touch. Let's do this here, and you see I can move this here with my finger. Let's go back to auto because that's convenient for that tutorial. So there are always different ways to get to the same result via the touch screen, or via the control wheel, or via a function button like here, the center button in the middle of that control wheel here, which I press once, and then I get into my ISO setting. I can touch it or control it via the control wheel. Simple like that. All right, these are the essentials that will help you to shoot that camera initially and gain your own experience how to work with that absolutely professional tool for professional photography. But there are a couple of tips and tricks I want to provide which might make your workflow essentially easier and help you to get things done in a quicker and more efficient way. And the first one is, if you customize the buttons here, let's go to this one again here. The list of options is very, very long. And that is annoying because a lot of these options I don't consider to be assigned ever to a function button. So I can customize this in the menu. Let's go into customize controls again. And this was here. And in customize control, I can actually edit what's in the list for function button 1, what's in the list for function button 2, what's in the list for the center button, and I can also customize the thumb wheel button here and customize wheel assignment, which I will not cover here And you find this in my other tutorials on the Leica Q3 28mm. But let's go to the second custom button, which is this one here, and where I have assigned before perspective control. And let's get this list shorter so that I have really only the options I need and the options I want to select here. So let's go into this. You might want to manually switch to mechanical shutter only, so let's keep this. Flash settings, definitely no. Exposure preview is set up in the menu. Long exposure noise reduction we keep on here. Wheel assignment, no, definitely not. User profile is something you set up once and for all in the menu, and this one is useless anyway. Clipping, no. Leica photos, I think we might want to keep that because I like the option to play with Leica looks a lot. Format card, definitely access via menu, and acoustic signals, definitely access via menu. So now this will look much more overseeable. Let's have a look. I tap and hold here, and you see this list is now much shorter, and it's focusing on the essential items I might want to assign to that function button. And that's something you can customize for each and every function button, for button number 1, for button number 2, for the top button here in the center of the control wheel, and also for this button here in the center of the 4-directional control button. The second hint I want to provide here is on the focus field. And first of all, if we go into focus here, let's go here to page number 1. And if you go into focusing, there are lots of things you can customize which go beyond an initial tutorial on that Leica Q3 43. But in the autofocus mode, you basically have multi-field spot, field zone tracking, eye, face, body detection for human beings, and then also animal detection. And if you are on spot or field, let's go to field for a moment. You can, of course, in live view now move your focus field. Let's move it here. You see I can move it with the 4-directional control button here. And unfortunately, there is no option here with the push of a button to center it back. It's not offered as an assignment option for the center button or any other function button, which is something which has been called out in the community a lot. I actually don't know why Leica is not finally adding this option to the customization functions we have for these buttons. And the question is, how can I quickly center it? Of course, I can try it manually, but that takes a while. And probably here's the center. And the way to do this is the following. Let's go back into focus. And in focusing, you have here touch autofocus. I have this off typically because I don't need touch autofocus. I have the camera typically on my right-hand side eye on the electronic viewfinder. And I don't use touch autofocus a lot. And by the way, if you want to learn more about touch autofocus, consult my other tutorials on the Q3 28mm. So I have this off. But there is also an option here to have touch autofocus in electronic viewfinder. And what I've activated here is autofocus quick setting only. That means if I accidentally touch with my nose on the touch screen, it will not move the autofocus field, but I get an additional functionality, which means if my focus field is decentered, by tapping twice on the LCD screen, it will center. Have a look here. Now it's back at the center. Let's move it away again. This works now in live view without the eye on the EVF, and it also works if I have my eye on the EVF. Let's go here. Let me try to do this like this. Let's cover the EVF. First of all, let's move it away, far away, this time to the upper left-hand side corner. Let's cover it with my finger. Let's double tap, and then if I go back, you see it's now centered again. That is a very convenient function. It's actually essential, and all other camera brands I have offer to assign this function to the center button here. So if I press it once, the focus field, no matter where it is, will return to the center. Here you need a double tap. Have a look once more, boom, back. Have a look once more. Let's cover with my eye, simulation, with my finger of course. Let's double tap, and it's back in the center. And that is an essential tip I think I need to provide for you to work efficiently with the autofocus and the autofocus field and the options you have there. Last but not least, at the beginning of the video I promised to show you the magic of the 1+ setting and also spending a couple of more remarks on the shutter speed dial. So if you're on automatic here on this red A and you control the aperture manually as pointed out at the beginning of the video, you're an aperture priority. You dictate the aperture, for instance f5.6, which is kind of the sweet spot for that aposomicron lens, and then the shutter speed is figured out by the camera automatically. Now on the shutter speed dial here, you only have full stops. You have 1/2000, 1/1000, 500, 250, 125, 60, 30, 15, 8, 4, 2, and then the magic 1+. And how can you control in between stops when it comes to shutter speed? And let's go to 1/250 seconds for a moment. And the magic of the in-between stops, so 1/3 stops, let's call it this way, happens in the menu. Because if I go into the menu, first of all, the camera realizes here by indicating M mode for fully manual that I now control the shutter speed and the aperture by myself, and the camera is not in control. And then I can tap here on the shutter speed dial, and I can control the slider now with my finger. I can also control it with the 4 directional control buttons here, and I can also control it via that wheel here, control wheel, you see, and then it jumps to the in-between stops. Have a look here. Now we have 1/200, 1/160, but then it's end of story, because I have said here I want to be around 1/250 seconds, which is my full stop. And I can also go in the other direction, of course. That's how you get the in-between stops, since you have only full stops here on the shutter speed dial. Now, if I go now here to 1+, I get full control over my shutter speed via the touch menu, you see. It automatically sets the camera to a 1-second shutter speed, and now let's say I use the 4 directional control buttons here, or the control wheel, whatever it is, or touch with my finger, I can jump here. And you see I get now the full spectrum of shutter speeds here, and this goes up to T mode and 120 seconds. If you look at that, 120 seconds. And I can also go here as fast as 0.6 seconds, because I'm in long exposure mode. Now, what if I want to become faster? Then I need to switch here to 1/2000 seconds. And if I now go into this here, you see I can go as fast as 1/16,000 seconds, but then I'm in electronic shutter mode and no longer in mechanical shutter mode. And that's the way to operate it. If you want to become faster than 1/2000, go to 1/2000, which is end of story here on the shutter speed dial, and then use the touch menu to go even faster, and as fast as 1/16,000 with electronic shutter. And if you want to go longer than 1 second, go into 1+, and then tap here again, and now you can go as long as 120 seconds, so 2 minutes. Here you go, then you come into T mode. And that's, I think, the last point I wanted to provide. That should enable you, with everything I said in that video, to fully operate and shoot that camera. Happy shooting, have fun. This is a brilliant camera. It's a fantastic tool for professional photography. It's a fantastic lens. It's a fantastic and very compact camera body. It's a really good sensor with high dynamic range, and with triple resolution technology. And if you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel, there is always more to come. Thanks for watching. Look at that beautiful camera. Stay safe and healthy. And of course, peace out.